Most people think caffeine gives them energy. But what if it doesn't? What if that morning coffee isn't creating energy at all, but simply masking exhaustion your body is already trying to warn you about? For millions of people, caffeine feels essential. The first sip of coffee in the morning, the afternoon energy drink, the tea that helps you push through a long day, the pre-workout that promises focus, power, and motivation. It's become so deeply woven into modern life that many people don't even question it. And yet, the moment caffeine disappears, the body often reacts in surprisingly dramatic ways. Headaches, fatigue, irritability, brain fog, strange cravings, a sudden feeling that something is missing. Which raises an interesting question. If caffeine is helping so much, why does quitting feel so difficult? The answer begins inside the brain. Caffeine is one of the most widely consumed psychoactive substances in the world. It works primarily by blocking adenosine, a chemical that naturally builds up in the brain throughout the day. Adenosine is part of your body's internal signal for rest. As it rises, you begin to feel sleepy. Caffeine steps in and blocks that message. You don't suddenly create more energy, you simply stop feeling how tired you actually are. And over time, the body adapts. The more caffeine you consume regularly, the more your brain adjusts by creating additional adenosine receptors. This means your usual coffee no longer feels as powerful as it once did. Tolerance builds. More caffeine is needed for the same effect, which is where the cycle begins. But what happens when you stop? The final cup is often uneventful. Maybe it's intentional. Maybe you decide to quit because your sleep is suffering. Your anxiety feels worse. Your heart races more than it used to. Or maybe you simply wonder what life feels like without needing stimulation to function. Or maybe it happens accidentally. You skip your usual coffee because the morning gets busy. At first, nothing dramatic happens. That's because caffeine is still circulating in your system. Depending on the person, caffeine's half-life can last several hours, meaning its effects fade gradually rather than disappearing instantly. For a little while, things feel normal. But underneath the surface, the chemistry is already shifting. Your brain is still expecting caffeine's familiar interference with adenosine. Dopamine activity, which contributes to motivation and reward, is still influenced by your regular routine. Stress hormones like cortisol may still be elevated from stimulation. But the countdown has started. And what happens next is where things begin to change. Within 12 to 24 hours, withdrawal often begins. This is when many people first notice something feels off. The most common symptom is the headache, and for some people it's intense. This happens because caffeine can constrict blood vessels in the brain. When caffeine is removed, those blood vessels relax and widen again, increasing blood flow. That sudden vascular shift may explain the pounding discomfort many people experience. But headaches are only part of it. Fatigue begins creeping in, not ordinary tiredness, a heavier kind of exhaustion, the kind where getting through simple tasks feels strangely difficult. This happens because adenosine is no longer being blocked. And remember, if you've been consuming caffeine regularly, your brain may have created more receptors to compensate. Now all that accumulated sleep pressure becomes impossible to ignore. Many people describe feeling sluggish, foggy, or emotionally flat. Focus becomes harder. Reaction speed feels slower, motivation dips, and this is often the moment people reach for coffee again, because relief can happen quickly. But if you push through, the real transformation hasn't even started yet. The hardest phase often arrives between days 2 and 3. This is where quitting caffeine catches many people off guard. Withdrawal symptoms often peak here, headaches may intensify, fatigue can feel overwhelming, mood changes become more noticeable, unexpected irritability shows up over small things, patience feels shorter, mental clarity seems worse instead of better, and some people begin wondering whether quitting was a mistake. But what you're experiencing is adaptation. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your brain chemistry is learning to function without artificial stimulation. Dopamine signaling begins adjusting. Adenosine receptors start rebalancing. Stress hormone patterns begin shifting. And while this phase feels uncomfortable, it's temporary. There's also something else happening that many people don't expect. Anxiety may actually begin changing. For some, caffeine creates a constant low-grade background tension that becomes so familiar it feels normal. The racing thoughts, the restless energy, the slight internal buzzing, the faster heartbeat, the sense of urgency. When caffeine disappears, some people notice this internal pressure starting to soften. Not immediately, but gradually. Research suggests caffeine can increase sympathetic nervous system activity, the part responsible for the fight or flight response. Removing it may help some individuals feel calmer over time. Digestion can also shift during this phase. Caffeine stimulates bowel activity, which is why many coffee drinkers rely on their morning routine. Without it, digestion may temporarily feel slower. This adjustment is normal. The body often needs time to re-establish its own rhythm, and then something interesting begins to happen. Around day 7, the fog often starts lifting, not always dramatically, sometimes subtly, but enough to notice. Energy begins feeling less chaotic, not necessarily higher yet, but steadier. The dramatic peaks and crashes start softening. That desperate afternoon slump may feel less intense. And for the first time, many people notice what natural tiredness actually feels like. This may sound strange, but stimulant-driven fatigue feels different from genuine energy regulation. Caffeine often creates artificial alertness followed by withdrawal-like crashes as effects wear off. Without that cycle, the body starts learning a more stable rhythm. Sleep becomes one of the first major benefits. Many people report falling asleep faster, staying asleep longer, waking less during the night, feeling less mentally wired at bedtime. This makes sense. Caffeine can linger in the body for hours, even when you think it's long gone. For sensitive individuals, even afternoon caffeine can affect sleep quality later that night. And poor sleep creates a vicious cycle. You're tired, so you consume caffeine. The caffeine disrupts sleep. Poor sleep increases caffeine dependence. Breaking that loop can be surprisingly powerful. By the end of the first week, some people begin noticing calmer mornings, less urgency, less dependency, less of that feeling that life cannot begin until the first cup. But the most surprising benefits often don't happen until later. By 2 weeks, the nervous system often feels noticeably different. This is where many people start saying something unexpected. I actually feel better. Not because they're suddenly overflowing with energy, but because things feel more balanced. Heart rate may feel steadier. Blood pressure may improve slightly in some individuals, especially those sensitive to caffeine's stimulant effects. That jittery edge begins disappearing. Mental focus often becomes cleaner, less frantic, more sustained. Instead of artificial bursts followed by crashes, concentration may feel smoother and more predictable. Hydration habits sometimes improve too. Caffeine itself isn't as dehydrating as many myths suggest, especially for habitual users. But caffeinated drinks often replace water, energy drinks, sugary coffees, sodas. When those habits change, overall hydration patterns sometimes improve naturally. Cravings may also begin shifting, and not just caffeine cravings. Caffeine is often paired with routines, sugary snacks, pastries, emotional triggers, work stress, and social rituals. Removing caffeine sometimes exposes how much of the habit was psychological rather than purely physical. That mid-afternoon craving may not have been about energy at all. It may have been about routine, stress relief, comfort, or reward. This awareness changes behavior, and behavior changes long-term health. By the 30-day mark, something deeper tends to happen. Dependence starts fading. That's when many people experience one of the most satisfying moments, waking up and not immediately needing caffeine, not craving it, not feeling panic if it's unavailable, just waking up naturally. This doesn't mean everyone suddenly becomes a morning person, but the relationship changes. Energy becomes more internally regulated. Your body starts trusting its own systems again. Sleep quality often continues improving. And better sleep affects nearly everything: mood, memory, hormone balance, immune function, appetite regulation, stress resilience. Research consistently shows sleep quality plays a central role in overall health, and for some people, caffeine was quietly interfering more than they realized. Mental clarity often feels different too, not hyper-alert, not artificially stimulated, just clear, calm, functional. This is especially noticeable for people who experienced caffeine-related anxiety. The constant sense of rushing may ease, thoughts may feel less scattered, conversations may feel more grounded, even physical sensations can shift. Less heart pounding, less shakiness, less tension in the shoulders or chest. Digestion may normalize into a new rhythm. And many people begin realizing something important. Their normal before wasn't actually normal. It was chemically managed. Long term, the effects become even more interesting. Without regular caffeine dependence, your body's natural adenosine system functions more normally. Sleep pressure builds and releases in healthier rhythms. Energy becomes less dependent on external stimulation. Stress responses may feel less exaggerated in sensitive individuals. This doesn't mean caffeine is inherently bad. For many people, moderate caffeine intake can fit comfortably into a healthy lifestyle. Research shows potential benefits in some contexts, including alertness, exercise, performance, and even certain health associations. But dependence is different from intentional use. That distinction matters. If you need caffeine to feel normal, that's a very different relationship than simply enjoying it. Long-term caffeine freedom can also improve emotional awareness. Without masking fatigue, the body communicates more honestly. You notice poor sleep faster. You notice stress sooner. You recognize when your energy habits need attention. This awareness can lead to healthier routines overall, more consistent sleep schedules, better hydration, improved nutrition, less reliance on stimulants, and perhaps the most unexpected benefit is psychological freedom. Not needing a drink to function, not planning your day around access to caffeine, not fearing withdrawal. That sense of independence feels surprisingly empowering. But it's also worth acknowledging reality. Not everyone needs to quit caffeine, and not everyone responds the same way. Genetics matter, tolerance matters, dose matters, timing matters. A single morning coffee is very different from multiple high caffeine energy drinks throughout the day. For some people, moderate caffeine causes few issues. For others, even small amounts trigger anxiety, sleep disruption, digestive discomfort, or dependency. The point isn't fear. The point is awareness. Because once you understand what caffeine is actually doing, your choices become more intentional. And that changes everything. The deeper transformation isn't really about coffee. It's about reclaiming your body's natural rhythm. Learning what real tiredness feels like. Learning what genuine energy feels like. Understanding whether your focus is natural or chemically borrowed. And perhaps most importantly, recognizing that energy is something your body is designed to create, not something you always have to force. Because maybe the real question isn't what happens when you quit caffeine. Maybe the real question is, what have you been missing while depending on it? If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next Daily Health Edit.